Yo, Pokey26 here, and we are going to talk about the new patch. I believe this patch is actually live already, too. I'm not positive, but the fact that it's not a PTR patch makes me think it's live. I could probably check by logging in, but yeah, you get the idea. It's probably live. This is what they decided to go with. I did quickly glance over it to see if there were new changes, and I did see at least one thing that was new, so hopefully there's a little bit to discuss when it comes to new stuff, and then just discussing the patch as a whole now that it's actually released. This is what they finalized and went with, and what we're going to see. And then maybe I'll comment on things that maybe need to be monitored still to see if they need to be further changed. So yeah, patch 2.0.3. We'll probably skip over most of these early things unless there's something important. But, just fixing issues. Camera track a unit. I guess that's probably for like observing or something. Let's see what else. Anything important here? Visuals, okay. Audio. Okay. I don't think there's anything important for me to discuss, but obviously if you care about any of those small changes or fixes, you can look at those. Hotkeys. Increase the amount of bindable hotkeys. I'm not sure what that means. Like, were there some keys that they still couldn't allow? I'm pretty sure in their previous patch they actually fixed this already, because before you could only bind like letters and maybe numbers and stuff, and then they fixed it and you could bind, as far as I know, pretty much anything. But apparently there was even more keys that they're able to add, so that's interesting for those that were still missing certain keys to add. Uh, oh, this is just for after you've already selected it. That way you can have passives set to the same hotkey as some sort of command that you normally enter. Like if you wanted True Shot Aura set to A, you could set it to A, and you could select it with A, and then when you're out of the menu, there's no longer a hotkey associated with it, so you can still use A to attack, which I guess could be relevant for some people, but generally I don't think this was a conflict to begin with. It is kind of cool. It does, to be honest, I think this mostly opens up things. It allows you to switch your passives to all of the same hotkey, and it can be some hotkey you use all the time. If you want it to be the S key, which is normally like stop or something, right? You could have all your auras set to S, and there wouldn't be any conflicts because once you're in the menu to select the aura, it still works fine. Otherwise, yeah, small changes. I think we knew most of these before, anyways. Adjustments to how MMR gains and losses are calculated. So now there's some sort of variance for bigger MMR swings. How does this work? We will look at this one, I guess, because it's maybe relevant to some people that play the BNet ladder. When a player starts their placement matches, they have high variance, which was maybe already there. I assume. I thought it was at least. It seems very small, like whatever this is. But essentially it's saying it's supposed to be better. There's supposed to be like more even matches, but also bigger MMR swings. Or how do you even say this? Like small, like what is this variance? Like they have higher MMR gains and losses, but yeah, supposedly this is supposed to compensate for the variance, but I could see people just yeah. Isn't that weird? They say we are hoping these changes reduce the occurrence of extreme MMR gains and losses, but also we are doubling MMR gains and losses. So I think it's just a whole new system, and you can't compare it to the previous system because what they want to do is have people at a higher variance of MMR to begin with. So like if the previous scale was like 3,500 to 5 or to 4,500 or something, now they want it to be like 2,500 to 5,500 or something, something like that, right? They want it spread out a bit more so that maybe you don't match those same people, and yeah, we'll see how it works. But I don't know if I really have anything to say about it as is. All right, and now we are on to the actual balance part. Like I said, I did see at least one new change. As far as I know, it's a new change. I'm not sure about the rest, but it's possible there's been some slight adjustments as well. So we'll look at those, we'll talk about those, and discuss my thoughts on what the patch actually has. Okay, all attacks with ground area of effect have the ward type added, which means units like siege units that can attack ground can now hit wards with their attack ground. I think that's pretty good, but it probably is pretty irrelevant most of the time. Like when it is relevant, it will matter, but it's not very often you see siege units to begin with, so we'll see. And then they did keep in the piercing damage against heavy armor getting decreased damage. So heavy armor now reduces the damage you take. So instead of taking 100% damage, you take 90% damage. That's pretty significant change. This is the main change I would say that Blizzard needs to keep monitoring. I don't necessarily hate this change going into the game, but it is the type of change where if it shows that it doesn't work well for something, they need to be ready to change it back or do more changes to fix it. That being said, 10% probably won't be like game breaking or anything, but it will definitely switch things because this affects everything, right? Affects all the races. Every race fairly often makes piercing damage. There are, of course, cases where you don't, like if you go Raider, Walker, Grunt, or mass hunts, or footies into even that. Even if you go footies into night, into like night gyro or something, gyros have piercing, so not even that. There are strategies that don't necessarily use piercing, like ghouls and destroyers, but there is quite often where people are going to add in fiends or are going to add in rifles, like with their rifle caster or their fiend destro. They're gonna go archers into dryad bear, and archers and dryads are both piercing as well. So there are a lot of units that this affects, and a big thing is it also affects creeps, right? Half the creeps in the game have piercing damage, and the other half have heavy armor. So like this matters a lot for creep speed if you have piercing damage against it, and also creep efficiency if you are tanking piercing damage with your heavy armor units, right? So definitely something to monitor. I don't hate the change. Like, I think it can be good for the game, but it's the type of change you would have liked to have seen 20 years ago in the game. You know, this like it's similar to when they first changed that wisp harvesting rate like a month ago or 2 months ago or whatever it was. It's the type of change where if they're going to do that, you would have liked to have seen it 20 years ago, not now. But we'll see how it goes. And it, like I said, is the type of thing they have to keep monitoring and adjust as needed. Mountain King Bash will now be able to stun magic immune air units when attacking with an orb. So this one's a new change, I believe, and I think it's a good change. I honestly didn't know this wasn't already a thing. Because can't he already bash magic immune units? Like I think the stipulation here is that he can do it with an orb and that it's air units. Which means he already could bash magic immune units, right? But yeah, apparently it wasn't working with orbs. It's a good change, but at the same time, it's very, very, very small because it involves having a Mountain King that has bash and has gone tier 3 and bought an orb and has the orb on the Mountain King and not another hero, and your opponent has to have magic immune air units. And your Mountain King has to attack those magic immune air units. So it's very small. You know, there are very few situations where this will matter, but it'll mostly just apply to, you know, hitting Destros from Undead. So it's relevant, but it's like very small. Because you don't even necessarily buy orb, and if you do buy orb, oftentimes it's on the Archmage instead. So okay. Orc. Pulverize can now target wards. This one's very interesting because as far as I know, this implies that the AoE from Pulverize happens to hit wards. So you don't even have to like manually target them. It's like wards are counting similar to, I was going to say a building, but Pulverize doesn't hit buildings, right? As far as I know, the AoE from Pulverize doesn't hit buildings. So, and maybe it does, and I just don't know. But yeah, it's interesting. It makes wards count basically like a normal unit. I don't know. It's cool. I don't know if it's good or bad, but sure. I do think more ways to kill wards is probably good because wards are in their current state, since they made them magic immune, they are very, very annoying if they get out of control, right? If there's too many of them, they're very difficult to deal with because they just take too much effort to focus down each one, and your opponent keeps planting more. So I think it's good. Same with burning out. Oil also able to target wards, basically AoE effects, similar to the attack ground thing here. They want more ways for wards to get killed. If they're going to do all these things to make wards killed easier, maybe they should have just left wards as they were before and, you know, make them dispellable. But yeah. Okay, here's another new change for Night Elf. So Wisp Lumber gather rate decreased from 7 to 7.5. I believe it was originally 8, right? And then they moved it to 7, which made it better. And now they're moving it back down to 7.5. So like a middle ground, I believe. It is cool that this is, you know, like I said, this is one of the changes where they do need to monitor it. And I'm glad they're continuing to change it as needed. But it still makes me question, like, why even make the change to begin with if, you know, you're this late into the cycle of the game. This isn't the type of change normally that should be made. But at least they are continuing to address it as needed. And you know, I think it's probably good. Like wood harvesting, it's definitely good. And then it got better. Now it's still good. So whatever. Let's get to the other changes for Night Off. Okay, so ooh. So this was not written out in the previous patch, but was something I actually mentioned. Was if they are increasing Archer health by 20, does that mean they are increasing Hippo Rider health also? And in fact, they are, and they wrote it out this time in the patch notes. Which is a horrible change. I don't want to see this. Please nerf it back. I will take minus 20 health on my archers if Hippo Riders also get minus 20 health. Please change it back. Delete Hippo Riders from the game. Anyways, that being said, it's cool. Archers get 20 extra health. Pickup dismount rate, cooldown, whatever, from 30 to 5 is pretty crazy. But at the same time, Hippo Riders were generally not used a lot. But if they're getting another 20 health and this buff, you know, maybe we'll see them try to be used a bit more. That being said, I really hate mass airplay in general. I think mass airplay is very poorly designed in Warcraft 3 because there isn't enough good anti-air units in the game. Usually your anti-air ends up being hero spells or heroes with orbs if it's like a blade or DH. You know, either blade or DH with orb or big AoE spells, right? Which is horrible design. Like you shouldn't have AoE, or you shouldn't have the counter to air, you know, your anti-air be heroes. There should be units for this. But most of the units that you would want for anti-air, you have to make too much of, and then they serve no purpose apart from the anti-air, and they're not even good enough as anti-air generally. Like, oh, you made a bunch of hippos or crowform talons versus wyvern, let's say, right? And then they add a couple bats and half your army's gone and the wyverns clean up the rest anyways. And you're the one who gets no XP. Like those situations are bad, right? But that's how it currently is. Anyways, my point is I don't like air units getting buffs, but it comes with this, which is cool. And I do think this is cool, even though I don't necessarily like Hippo Riders. But yeah. Huntress Glaives no longer bounce to and from structures. I think this is relevant as well because it means, wow, I mean, it means what it says. But basically, they're a lot worse at sieging, which means the mass tier 1 style with like hunts and archers and stuff are a lot worse at just base trading if you're no longer killing multiple things. Because now that they also don't bounce from structures, it means you're no longer killing workers with their bounce, right? Like, I think this is a big thing that people don't necessarily realize, is if you're hitting a main and they're repairing it, you're no longer getting bounces to hit their workers because they can't bounce from the structure. You could bounce off the workers and hit the structure after, but that's very unreliable and clunky and not something that you would realistically do. So yeah, now you can basically repair against Huntresses much easier in general. And in compensation, elves get 10-second decrease on Moonglaive upgrade time, which is cool but pretty irrelevant, I would say. Like, hunts are still not particularly a great unit. They don't even have the move speed buff that was originally proposed. Like they already got move speed nerfed in the previous patch, but they proposed buffing it back up in the PTR, and that is not here. So Huntresses sound kind of bad still. Basically what we get is 20 health archers and some hippogriff rider stuff at the cost of, you know, everything else. Okay, undead units resurrect by animate dead. Now their abilities, pretty irrelevant, but cool. Frost Nova range increased. They have nerfed Frost Nova a lot, so I can see why they're trying to like buff something for it again. The range does look kind of crazy here, but you know, with all the other nerfs Nova has had, I guess I can accept this. Nova's obviously one of the more insane skills there is, but at least it's not more damage, it's not more slow, it's not more AoE, it's just longer range, you know? Okay, well, we'll take it. Okay, prioritize air now toggles properly in a group. That's pretty cool. Now you can, now it should work similar to defend, where you might have to click it twice to make sure it's on the right thing, but it will have every unit on the right thing and not like have them interchanging, you know, half and half if some of them were already set and some of them weren't when they just came out of the crypt. So that's cool. And now the neutral changes. Pit Lord Cleave now targets wards, which basically they just want more AoE to be able to hit wards. Cool. If you are against wards, maybe you even think about picking up a Pit Lord. I don't know. Dark Ranger, drain life, mana cost decreased. Okay. Like, it's probably cool to add this because Dark Ranger is kind of weak. Self damage type change from magic to universal, so that if you're magic immune, you can still pass health over and stuff to like allies, I believe, or whatever the case is, or gain. I don't know. You get the idea. Basically, if you've used an invuln, they want you to be able to like use this properly, I believe, right? Yeah, like these are fine. It's like whatever. Okay, and then Tinker changes. Tinker changes are kind of cool. I don't know if they're good. As in, Tinker's already like kind of strong, but he was always generally outshined by Panda. But now they're like buffing Tinker, so they're making Factory stronger by half a second on the early levels. With 1 engineering, which is okay. Like later levels are the same, so I think that's fine. I do think getting Factory stronger early is probably fine. Maybe, unless I'm getting Tinker Tower rushed. Maybe it's actually pretty annoying. I don't know. I don't know if he actually needed this. It does probably make him a little more relevant for like pushes though, because he probably gets an extra little mech goblin spawn out of this, right? Or maybe multiple. Okay, Tinker cluster rockets max damage per interval. So I believe this is, yeah, I guess they explain it here, but this is what I was gonna say anyways, is Tinker rockets kind of hit like multiple times really fast, which is why if you're getting hit by it, you'll see like a bunch of little mini stuns kind of, right? But yeah, it apparently contains 4 damage intervals, and you can take up to 4 instances of damage. And this basically means that you can take more damage from it if you're getting hit by it multiple times or whatever, right? And more damage across more units because it's like a max damage cap or whatever too, or something. So is this, I guess to put it a different way, this is really saying for the 4 damage intervals, you can do up to like 1,000 damage spread across the units you're hitting, right? Because it's 4 times the 250. Obviously, you're not doing 1,000 damage to a single target, but if you're hitting lots of units, it's like a higher damage cap, which is pretty cool, I guess. But I do think rockets were already okay. But I guess this makes them more relevant right away on level 1 and 2 rockets. And I think that's when they were a little weaker. Like usually people don't retrain till rockets until they're like at least level 3, if not level 5 Tinker. So that's kind of cool that they're making him more relevant early, both for rockets and factory spawn. So we might see more Tinker play, especially as like a second hero, or as like a pushing third hero or something. Like small buffs. I think it's all right to have these changes, but it does mean if you're facing those players that make a bunch of towers and run around with a Tinker getting level 6 on him right away, they're going to basically get it done easier. Now, obviously his level 5 plus type stuff is the same. You know, you see these numbers, they're the same. So like a late game Tinker is still the same, but it does mean that he can get there easier because he's stronger early on. So yeah, I think these changes are good though. I'm glad that they didn't buff the late game part of Tinker, because really high level Tinker is very annoying with people just running around with like boots and, you know, mechanical semi magic immune type Tinker stuff basically. Now one of the other big changes, yeah, early creeps with Tinker might be pretty good with the extra factory, with the factory spawning quicker, or if you're using rockets right away, I guess you can hit for more damage per interval, which is probably pretty relevant. Because I think like a level 1 rockets, isn't it like 35 or something? I don't even know what it is. You hit like 35 times 3 here or something? I don't really know what the numbers were. These numbers look weird to me, how they change from one to the next. Either way, you can do better right away, for sure, with creeping or with pushing. And then the panda changes, which are, like I said, one of the biggest changes in this patch, apart from like the piercing damage to heavy armor stuff. This is probably the biggest. And let's see what they decide to end up with. So damage increased on all levels, but primarily level 1 and then a little bit on the max level, which is pretty cool. Like getting level 1 breath being stronger is actually irrelevant, because there was a lot of times as Panda, you didn't even want to use your level 1 breath. Sometimes you just wanted to like, you're like, oh, I'm 2.8, I should just wait a little longer because it's a big increase, right? You get almost double the damage if you wait till you're level 3. But now it's quite a bit less percentage increase because the level 1's buffed quite a bit. I do think that's pretty cool that they still leave, they leave the middle one, which is the most used one, roughly the same, like a very small increase, but then they buffed the other ones a bit. Of course, this is coming with some other changes that make him weaker. Max damage increased. Okay, that's a buff, I guess. But it's harder to even reach this max damage because AoE is changed. I don't know why they list it as they listed this wrong. It should not say it's increased from 25 to 60 and 125 to 175. It should say it's decreased from 125 to 60 and 300 to 175, because these were the PTR changes, right? These weren't the original Panda breath. These were the PTR changes that then got further changed to this. So they kind of wrote this wrong, but basically Panda Breath is less AoE now than it used to be, but it's better than their original PTR suggestion or whatever. So it's now a middle ground. Instead of 25 or 125 for initial AoE, it's 60. And instead of 125 or 300 final AoE, it's 175. So fairly middle ground on both. I do think this is somewhat reasonable in exchange for all the damage they're giving. You know, higher max damage, higher breath damage, and as we'll see later, higher AoE damage, damage over time as well from Haze Fire, like combining them together. Not necessarily AoE damage, but you get it. Yeah, basically they wanted the visuals of the spell to kind of match better rather than changing the visuals, I guess. And they wanted to up the damage for a nerf to range. Yeah, they even write it here, nerf to range. So I do think this one is relevant though, or no, relevant's not necessarily the word I was looking for. I do think this change can actually be good or like reasonable. Before, the AoE was too small. If you've ever seen a comparison of this AoE compared to the old AoE, it was crazy small. But this new proposed middle ground might be okay. We'll have to see it more in action and make sure it still looks like it's hitting enough. But if this actually feels like it's hitting enough, then Panda actually gets buffed overall, right? Like higher initial damage on all levels, and quite a bit on like level 1, for instance. Decent on final level. And the damage over time is huge on level 1 as well. If you're level 2 and you're doing Haze Fire, Breath, you're now doing 15 extra damage and an extra 3 damage per second, which I don't actually know how long it lasts. Let's say it's 5 seconds. It might be like 8 or something, but you know, it's something like at least 5 seconds. So this is at least 15 damage here, maybe more if Haze lasts longer. I forget how long this damage over time is. And 15 here, so it's like you might have an extra 30 damage on level 2 per Haze Fire Breath. Pretty relevant. Yeah. Okay, well, pretty long for Haze, but I don't think the damage over time lasts the full 12 seconds, right? I think the damage over time is less than the full duration of Haze, but I could be wrong. Maybe it lasts as long as Haze is on there, but I thought it might have a different duration. Either way, pretty significant. Both level 1 Haze Fire and max level Haze Fire. Okay, so yeah, 5 seconds. So max level Haze Fire is an extra 20 damage compared to what it used to be, and an extra 10 damage here. So 30 damage total for Haze Fire. And here it's 30 damage with the two combined. Pretty relevant. Yeah, pretty relevant indeed. You know, that's 1 or 2 extra hit. Like that's like 2 extra hits on every unit that gets hit by that, right? Like 2 extra auto attacks or something. So pretty good. I do think this can be a good change for Panda, but I don't know if Panda really needed changes. Like Panda was already good, right? If this is a stronger version of Panda, I think that's actually bad, right? Like people don't want to see Panda further buffed. But if it's a weaker version of Panda, it's going to feel horrible because having less AoE definitely feels the worst, right? That being said, I guess there's some sort of middle ground that might be reached where you feel bad about the AoE, but the payoff for the units you actually hit feels good. So that's, I guess, what they're probably aiming for. Either way, I think it can be an okay change. The AoE's reasonable enough. damage increase is reasonable enough. We'll see how it works in game, but I think it can be a reasonable change. But it is, this and the piercing damage change are both ones that they want to monitor the most, for sure. But yeah, I think they both can be good or reasonable at least. You know, they're not like horrible changes, but they do need to be monitored and checked further. Yeah. Bug fixes. Okay. Oh, this is actually relevant. Units that are hexed no longer have the short window where their item bonuses do not apply. Pretty cool that they fixed that. Same with this, I guess, with hex. Yeah. Overall, my thoughts on the patch. Um, Honestly, there's not that much here that like mixes it up apart from the two big changes, of course, right? Like this, I think this is a cool change. It's a good change, but it does need to be further monitored and things need to be further tweaked to fix things if there's problems, right? Like if piercing damage actually struggles too much, or if other races melee units like grunt, ghoul, footies are too much for elf with archers to handle early game, and elves are just getting like swarmed too easily, you know, maybe something needs to be done. But they are already doing some of that, right? Like they did give 20 extra health to archers, so they're trying to somewhat compensate for that already. So I think it'll be fine. But yeah, it does probably hurt Paladin Rifle style and Farseer Headhunter style a bit as well. But they have easier access to footies and grunts because they don't need a war mill or blacksmith for those, right? And then, of course, the panda change. I think the panda change was unneeded, but I don't hate where they ended up with it. Like it could be cool just to see it be different than before. You know, you'll want to try it out, see if it feels better and like what it feels better against, what it feels worse against. Obviously, the AoE change does matter a lot. There are times where you're like blocked off from farms at a human base, right? And you want to AoE down buildings or peasants, and maybe the lower AoE makes you not even reach those. You know, maybe you're only hitting the farms now, which could feel quite bad. So we'll see how it feels when you're actually playing, because there are some range limitations there now. And he could have trouble hitting air with the smaller AoE, like lots of Gargs, for instance, or Dragonhawks or whatever. But when it does hit well, it seems like it could have a good payoff. So I don't hate the change. We'll see how it works in the actual gameplay. Most of the other changes are pretty small. Nova range, fairly small but relevant. Like you'll definitely notice it sometimes when the Nova is hitting you across the screen. And then, you know, wards being able to get hit by more AoE stuff is cool. But otherwise, most of the stuff is whatever. It's cool that they're further tweaking this as well. This obviously probably shouldn't have been put in the game to begin with. You know, changing harvest rate this late into the game's life cycle, but at least they're further addressing it, so that's cool. Yeah. Overall, I would say the patch is... I'd say the patch is fine, but it's not even that interesting. There's like big things that change things up for sure, like this, the piercing damage against heavy armor. But at the same time, I feel like the game's largely going to function the same as it did before. Unless Panda feels crazy strong now or something. Like maybe you will see more pandas from night elves and humans in particular. But if not, then the patch is kind of uninteresting, right? Like not much of anything meaningful was done, or like meta change. There wasn't really big meta shifts here, so yeah, we'll see how it works. I think it's an all right patch, but yeah. Yeah, there's definitely more micro that can be done against Panda, which is, I guess, cool. And more positioning of buildings as well. Like I mentioned earlier with farm, blacksmith, arcane, vault blocking off at like expos and stuff, if they're positioned correctly, the end tail of where the breath of fire reaches might not even be in the peasant worker line because the AoE is considerably shorter and smaller. So positioning of units and positioning of buildings can both matter a lot versus Panda for sure. Which sounds cool, but I wonder if that means Panda's kind of weak now. I don't feel like he's necessarily that weak though, because like the damage increase definitely matters. He will be better in like big fights. Like if it's 80 food armies and there's a lot of units, surely he hits enough units to where he's even better. But maybe he's weaker right away, or maybe he's worse at harassing.